I'd like to pose one question each to each of the panelists based on your 3 minute introduction. This is also gleaning from some of the questions that we received from the participants today. The first one is to Anders. Anders, you mentioned the fact that on this fake news, sometimes we found ourselves in a situation of being too little, too late. That's one aspect. But I also want to ask you to highlight, in your opinion, what are the key ingredients for trust? Anders?
Thank you very much. The key ingredients, let me start with the key ingredients for trust. One of them is to be factual. The second one is also for scientists to be clear what's the role of the scientist. Is there any background information that is not shared? We have seen some cases around that. I think trust in science overall is very high, but there is a risk of trust in scientists becoming slightly eroded. And that is also something that's seen. What was interesting in this study by the Center for Digital Health was that they found that it was basically 12 influential accounts on Facebook that stood for 65% of COVID misinformation. So there are things that, let's say, can be done in order not to spread those things further. I also saw, I saw a very interesting question from Dr. Nizino
All right.
about how scientists are communicating the information. And I think there's something to be done as well in simplifying messaging, being factually correct, but also bridging the gap between the academic language and the language with respect to what does it mean. So that was a very good question. And I hope with that relatively long answer, I could answer your question, Dr. Zakri.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Anders. That's very good. In fact, this about the need for simplification of a message rings through all the participants actually. My question to Edson is, you also mentioned about the news media sort of having their back to the wall, when in actual fact that is supposed to be our line of defense. Can you elaborate further, Edson, and tell us what are the way forward to this problem?
Oh, that's a very big question. I mean, charting the way forward. Part of your question, I think, focuses on I think the role that the news media play. I think one encouraging finding based on the recent survey conducted by the Reuters Institute for the Study of Journalism at Oxford University, where they did a survey of news audiences across 46 countries, if I'm not wrong. They found that across most media markets, trust in the news media actually increased during the surveys that were conducted this year compared with last year. So this may be a COVID-19 effect as more and more people are keeping an eye on what's going on around them with regards to the pandemic. They're trusting legitimate information sources more. So that's an encouraging finding. But I think the news media really definitely play an important role with what Anders said earlier about the importance of simplification, of simplifying complex scientific terms and processes so that the public can understand them. The news media actually have that training. We are trained to write in simple ways. I remember when I went to journalism school, textbooks would say that when you write for a general circulation paper, you should aim for a 5th grade reader. And so that the language that we're trained to use in our news articles is really marked by simplicity. But that can also be at the expense of, sometimes at the expense of accuracy. When you try to simplify something too much, then you might miss on the nuances. And that's why I think scientists should also be trained to work closely with the news media I know that some scientists are very wary of giving media interviews. Some scientists would say, I will just be misquoted, or I'll give a 1 hour interview and they will only use like one short quote or sound bite from me. And I can see how this can be very discouraging for some scientists. But I think that link between scientists and the news media should be enhanced rather than taken away.
Thank you, Edson. I want to proceed with this line of discussion. And Dr. Emma, you also mentioned about the need for scientists to be sort of upfront, and you were saying sometimes the scientists themselves are lost in the sense to their own doing. Can you elaborate on that, Emma, and what needs to be done? Of course, Edson earlier on saying there needs to be a greater sort of dialogue between the scientists and the public. Emma, you have the floor.
Thank you, Prof. Zachary. I feel that there's a lot of factors influencing different aspects of trust in science. I think one of the most important thing to note is that science does not come naturally to everyone, as I've mentioned earlier. There's still a huge majority of us, of the public, who do not have direct contact to scientists, who don't have family members who are involved in science, do not regularly listen to public lectures on science discoveries, don't have any further education on science after school. I think a lot of people, the real last science experience that they had was probably that science experiment they had to perform in high school. So to a lot of people, their knowledge about science comes from communication sources. And it is very much mediated. And it comes from media sources such as newspapers, magazine, TVs, the movies that we see, and as well as online sources and social media, of course. And these sources help mediate people's knowledge, people's understanding about science, their values, as well as their attitudes towards science. And media representation of science plays a huge role to build public trust, but they can also play a huge role to, give distrust in science. So aside from the media, we may also get information from, interpersonal communication, interpersonal sources. We, as humans, we tend to believe information from the people that we trust. So whoever that we trust that the sources of information that they are giving is real, is truth. So whether it is our family members, it's our friends, political figures maybe, opinion leaders, educators, religious leaders, and even social media influencers, these are, people who can influence trust and might be, useful in our efforts to, to gain or to improve public trust in science. And these sources, they are the ones that can play a role to help us build that trust. And of course, when we talk about information that is available about science, there's a lot of misinformation as well circulating, both in the mass media as well in these interpersonal communication channels. So if, let's say, a person that we trust spreads lies or untruth about science, and we tend to trust them rather than what we hear or or what we think or the facts itself. So this misinformation can instigate fear and negative attitudes towards science. So for example, a recent study published on COVID-19 vaccine acceptance revealed that Asian countries, including Malaysia, recorded a high percentage of fear of COVID-19 vaccine side effects. And Ministry of Health of Malaysia also conducted a really big survey last year in December, where about 212,000 people answered the survey. And they revealed that although about 67% of Malaysians agreed to taking COVID-19 vaccine, However, they have also highlighted concerns such as the side effects, concerns on what was used in the vaccines itself, fearing that the vaccine could cause death, fearing that the vaccines do not work. And also, some of them also believe that they are not at risk of contracting COVID-19 infections. So we also hear a lot of conspiracy theories circulating. I'm sure all of you have heard it before. 5G microchips, vaccines that could alternate our DNAs. These are the things that, are scare people. And, fearful things, that information that's easily spread. And we have to understand that human decision making is not easy. It's a complex process. And we tend to trust our hearts more than our brains sometimes when we're weighing the pros and cons. I think in Malaysia, we have a lot of people who are openly expressing their views, anti-vaxxers, and challenging the science of vaccines itself. I saw this one guy on Facebook suggested ways to cleanse ourselves after being forced to vaccinate using traditional remedies. So that was interesting. But these people, they are the ones who actually could actually promote distrust in science, and the spread of this untruth about science would confuse people at best.
All right.
And obviously instigate fear among the public. Yeah.
Okay, thank you, Dr. Emma. Again, the discussion here is quite continuous, and let me, Dr. Lego, first I apologize for you being cut off, but my question to you is your statement that cultural behavior is a very key component here. And Dr. Emma also mentioned earlier that in our region, in Southeast Asia, that cultural behavior may be a strong force of accepting science or otherwise. Can you elaborate on that, Dr. Lego?
Yes, thank you, Professor Zachary, and my apology once again, kick off, but yeah, I managed to come back. Okay, so yeah, I believe that it's not only in Indonesia, but most of the South Asian countries, we are still, have a very strong bond of, the culture. And then we also believe in the remedies, herbal remedies, for curing COVID as well. And we've got the culture that, in fact, Southeast Asia, like gathering. People like, communicate, gathering, and then, have a social contact from one to another. So when this COVID-19 outbreak make them that stay at home, work at home, that's they understand that is for their own sake and also for the health for others as well. But the thing is that it is difficult to avoid that habit because it's cultural habit. It's especially in rural, so it's difficult when you said that you're not allowed to have a wedding ceremony, something like that. So it's difficult. So rather than avoid that, and then the government sometimes just said, okay, if you want to gather and if it is very important, so you can only have maybe 20 invitees, that's it, and have to follow all the protocols, health protocols in that. So, but shake hands and also hugging and kissing on the cheek. Sometimes it's happened, and it is difficult nowadays. But we get used to that, and then that through the community leaders, we can remind society with that through the little community. So we can just small community, and then the leader in there just remind them on, and it helps. and then we just put, all that, appeals everywhere, just keep the distance, and then wash your hands, as all the health protocol everywhere. It helps. And also that the religious leader is important as well in this case, because that 90% of the population in Indonesia were Muslim. They used to pray 5 times per day, and in every corner on the, in Indonesia, in every small region, we have a kind of mosque. We call it langgar, and people used to pray in there. So when the that langgar or mosque is closed, so you've got to have your pray at home, and then the people cannot understand that. They insist that they should go to mosque. So in this case, this is very important to ask the religious leader, to, just to give awareness to them about, what's the dangers and what should we do. So it happens as well with other religions. Now the gates are closed, so what we should do. So with other religions, let's say the Christian, so we have kind of worship, online. So we have online worship. So, and then people can understand that, although that, several of them insist that they should come, but, we try to make it smooth, and then the government also ask the religious leaders, just to have a word to, the people, their community, and actually it works. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much again. Okay, I think it's 11, almost 5 minutes past the hour. The last segment of this discussion, I think, would be taking in some of the questions from the audience. Dr. Arimoto still in the audience?
Still here.
Yes. Can you paraphrase your question to any of the panelists, Professor?
Okay. Thank you so much for giving me this exciting opportunities, particularly in Asia. Zachary mentioned the different cultures and the different contexts, and anyways, my question and comments is the 3 points. One is we need building the a new type of the training and education programs for future promising the scientists in each countries. And of course, the another one is the building the how to say, the training or discussion place for the political leaders. Indonesian colleagues mentioned is the awareness of the importance of the dialogues between the scientists and the political sectors. Well, this is one. And the other one is the we need more the synthesize or the building the transdisciplinary approach, not only the traditional natural science and engineering medicine, but also the social science and the humanities, particularly humanities, including the, you mentioned the culture and the different values, not only the national level, but also the local level is very, very important. And finally, therefore, it's very happy for us and for me is the Asian sectors English. Now this started those kind of the discussion. I do hope the expanding these continues the platforms not only in the established the administration and the governmental officials and scientists, but also the in the future, near future, we invite the young students, scientists. Okay, that's my comments and questions. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Anyone want to respond to that? Maybe Dr. Lego and Dr. Emma, both of you.
Can I start first, Prof. Zachary?
Oh, yeah, sure.
Okay. I personally believe that the concept of trust itself is underdeveloped. I mean, there's a lot of work being done in the in measuring trust from a science perspective, but measurements that include the social sciences perspective, psychological wise, is still underdeveloped. So I think a lot of our measurement in our survey or how we measure trust should be relooked at and broadened to also include multidimensional measurements of public trust in science, as seen is like psychology, and also looking at from communications perspective as well. I think it's very good that you've pointed out that we need to start, paying attention to how to build literacy skills at such a young age. For us, it's very important, not just in terms of science and health literacy skills, but also media literacy skills at schools. And we should start to introduce these kinds of courses at the younger stage at school level. I just wanted to share with you the center that I'm currently leading, the UK UNICEF Communication for Development Center for Health, HEALTHCOMM. We just actually recently established this earlier this year, and the aim of the center is to engage with healthcare practitioners as well as healthcare educators to recognize the importance of communication and to in delivering their their programs, their campaigns at the community level. So we are trying to develop curriculum at our undergraduate as well as postgraduate level to introduce science communications, health communications, communications for development, to build, a better, graduates with better understanding on how to communicate better. So we hope that we are able to do that. We're also doing some research relating to communication for development as well in different areas of health. And part of our efforts are also training Ministry of Health practitioners, those who are working on the ground, how to use communications to design impactful programs. So I think this is a good synergy that we're trying to establish to sort of close the gap between the health practitioners as well as the social scientists. So
Okay.
I hope that answers.
Yes, thank you.
Dr. Lego?
Yes, thank you. So while Dr. Emma maybe talk about the formal and about the training and everything, but I'd like to talk about from my experience what I did with my scientist college and also engineer, because I work for the research and development center as well. So in this case, that yes, they are not very concerned about to talk with a public. So we've got the kind of training, just to open their perspective. This is what you should do. So what you have to do when you just only 3 minutes talk, and you need to mention about what you are doing. So that is difficult for them, and then just what we so we've got kind of a training, and for that training, so we just try to give them ammunition, what they should do, and then just avoid jargon, avoid technical terms, difficult one, just try from the beginning, something like that, because sometimes that people just know science, but what exactly science, or what is actually what you are doing with this technology. So it's difficult and to understand, but they've got to explain in a simple way to them. So yes, scientists need training. There is a kind of character that they can talk easily, but sometimes not. So we've got to find kind of scientists, what do you call it? Just they can talk very nicely in front of public. So and then people can understand that. So that is the first one. So yes, scientists and engineers, they need training because of And then we choose several of them which they can talk to public fluently. So we can choose them, and then it's kind of we make kind of teamwork, and those one just put on the team. So this is what we do, and that helps because after that we've got lots of natural disasters in Indonesia, and one of that it is easy to talk to public because natural disaster is not only scientists can talk, but the public should help as well. So it's kind of collaboration among scientists, not only one particular field, but social science too. They need to to embrace all together work. So it helps, and then we make what kind of small films, short film, about 4 minutes film about tsunami and about the earthquake and something, and then just publish to the public. So
Thank you so much.
yes.
Thank you. I have a question for Dr. Edson, and I'm taking this question from Victorine Zeno. Are you there? Let me read your question, and that is for Dr. Edson. She says communication between decision makers or public policy makers is mostly made in the context of emergency. But the question is, what are the strategies the scientists can use to be accurate in communication given the limited time given to him? So Edson, over to you.
Thanks for that question. That's also a difficult question because we can't design a whole semester or a whole curriculum just to train scientists on how to effectively communicate. I think also continuing what Prof. Lego started, I think what I'm noticing is that even when I did my PhD, and my PhD was already in journalism, right? Very few PhD programs actually have a component of training scientists to communicate their research outside academia, right? We're trained how to write good research projects, publish in journals, but there's really no training for how to communicate our research findings outside academia. So I think that's one step that we can do. Those that run PhD programs can think of ways to start training future scientists in terms of how to communicate directly to the public. So I think that's one thing. In terms of specific strategies, in one focus group study that I'm involved in, when we asked scientists how do they disseminate information about their research, a lot of them talked about actually reaching the public directly through seminars, through public lectures. But when we talk to the public, when we ask them how they learn about, in this research we were focused on energy related information. I think none of the public participants mentioned learning directly from scientists. So I think we're seeing that, of course, when you run public lectures, it's difficult to reach many people. You can only reach a certain number of participants. And so I think a promising avenue for scientists would be to reach the public via news commentaries, interviews with the media, and that also requires training. I think one important strategy is to really learn the language that people use. For example, in the Philippines during the Typhoon Haiyan, which was in 2013 the strongest ever typhoon to hit land in history around the world, the Weather Bureau of the Philippines actually warned people in the affected areas of a storm surge. But during that time, the term storm surge was not used commonly. That was probably one of the few times that people heard of this term mentioned in the news media and in the weather bulletins. So they didn't know what it was. But what it looked like when people saw it was just like a tsunami, a tidal wave, and that's a term that's not precise, but something that is highly relevant to people's daily experiences. And of course, after some time, after that incident, that unfortunate tragedy, people got used to this term. So I think one important step to communicate effectively is to really learn the language of the public. Sometimes when we are so involved in our own research and we use our jargon, even in communication research, we use a lot of jargon. These are terms that may be familiar to the other members of academia, but may be very strange, may sound very strange to the public. So I think constantly hearing, being immersed in the public, knowing the terms that they use, the experiences that they face is very important for scientists.
Thank you, Edson. I want to give the floor to Anders, but before that, let me pose a question to Dr. Tuan. Dr. Tuan, I'm quite intrigued by your description of the triangle of the government, people, and the scientists. But what intrigues me was your comment that sometimes the social sciences is more critical than the natural sciences in trying to reach out to the public. Comment, Dr. Tuan?
Yeah. Because I mentioned about that because when in the context of the emergency crisis like this, the decision maker, they need very high value of the evidence, and the evidence not only from the medicine area, but they need to have different evidence from different area to make the final decision, the right decision for the people, for the country. So I think that, but in the opposite, each sector, for example, for the health sector, they think about the benefit of the health. That when stop the disease and prevent the disease and protect people from disease. But the other sector, scientific from the other sector, for example, for the economic, for the social, the more thinking about the benefit from their field of research. So I think how the important question is how all the scientists or the experts, they provide evidence based on the public interest. I think it's very important. But in that case, it needs the role of the government who are the central point to drive the scientific to provide the evidence, the right evidence based on the public interest. I think that's very important.
Thank you, Dr. Tuan.
And I would like to have one comment for the question from Victoria Niso about the communication decision maker or public policy is most made in the context of emergency, and what the strategy the scientists can use to be accurate in the communication given in limited of time given to him. But from our experience, I have 3 points. The first, because it's the very limited time, so the scientists should be understand the context of the consultation. It's the same evidence, but it's different context, different requirement from the decision maker in different context. They need different way to use the evidence. So that is the scientists should be understand the context when they, for example, the meeting, the topic, the policy objective to provide right evidence. The second thing that they have to prepare the debt evidence as that's suitable. It's that context. That is second key. Key. And the third one, the evidence need to related to the to have the policy option. With the policy option, the scientists should be provide both pre and con of the X scenario that for the policymaker. That is a three key lesson from my experience. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Tuan. Anders, you have the floor.
Thank you. I just wanted to return to one of the very good questions posed by Professor Arimoto. I think that funders have a role to play in providing training programs. Very concretely, one of the best research funds I got included actually media training, it including project management training, including training in terms of science policy to understand the landscape. So funders have a role. Also to mention the role of humanities and social sciences, because that is really what moves society in many ways, how people do that. And so that is very important as well. So it cannot be stressed more. And finally, I think there is a role for our business to play in terms of providing what you can call synoptic science, meaning summaries of science to support policy decisions. Because one of the experience we have learned is that on top level decision makers, they not necessarily read the scientific papers themselves. They are too specialized, the papers, but they will go into interpret, for instance, from media. So if scientists and actually industry can bridge that by providing, let's say, policy briefs, that would be quite useful.
That's interesting, Anders, when you mention about synoptic science. Maybe it's worth looking into. But there's already precedent on this, You remember the IPCC on climate change, the IPBES on biodiversity. These are really assessment. We are not doing actual R&D, but gleaning through all those scientific reports and transmitting them to the public, Thank you. I have an interesting question from Tariq Bashir to all of us, or to me. What about the idea of having stand-up sci medians to popularize science on the analogy of stand-up comedians? Before I give the floor, I want to remind Tariq, this is interesting, but it's already done. In terms of the public communicators, the best known is, of course, David Attenborough, who is the face of nature conservation. And in Malaysia itself, people like the actress Maya Karen, is also a spokesperson or the bridge between the science and the public. Any one of you would like to respond to Tariq about sci medians or comedians? Anyone at all?
Just a quick one, Prozakri. I think Malaysia, Malaysians, we all unite. Sorry.
Not only for Malaysia, but also globally.
Yes, yes. I think we can all unite through comedy and humor. I think especially in Malaysia, we all just like to unite over, laughing. And yes, I think that there's a lot of potential there, but also looking into the newer social media to promote this kind of content, because nowadays we look at the easiest way to learn are the micro learning, micro lessons that we can actually do via TikTok. For example, I think TikTok is also a platform that is underutilized but has so much potential for learning opportunities, and I think scientists could definitely try and use that platform. And I think a lot of educators, a lot of people who are on TikTok are spreading education materials with high followers. So I think it's definitely one of the media platforms, social media platforms that we should try and tap to.
All right, thank you, Emma. Let me conclude by just reminding our participants today that this science policy interface, or what we're doing here, the dialogue, that we are conducting, to me, is really the last piece of a giant jigsaw of trying to bring the advantage or power of science to the public. And some of the key players is, of course, the policymakers or the politician, but at the start of it would be the scientists. And too often, as we heard today, the scientist is not able to communicate in simple language what they wanted to say. So there is a scope also then for INGSA to provide some training courses, for the scientists. But eventually, what we hope to do is to have a community of stakeholders who could understand one another. I was lucky in having some experience dealing with politicians. I serve as the science advisor to my prime minister, and at one time, science advisor to Ban Ki-moon. And these guys, ladies and gentlemen, are very simple people, and they're very practical. They say, I don't care what science you would like to give advice on, but it must impact on the people, whether they can have jobs, where can they have income, and whether they can have good health. Very simple. So it's a very heavy responsibility for the scientists, for the science communicators, for experts that we have heard today. So, as Abi said, we hope this webinar this morning is the beginning of more dialogue that is to be convened, in particular by INGSA. Once again, thank you so much for your high-level participation, interest, and commitment. I thank everyone, and with that, let me close this webinar. Thank you so much.